You're listening to WTMFI 67.42 FM Chicago.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to WTMFI 67.42 FM Chicago. This is TJ Fanpool coming to you live on TikTok. I am changing my format a little bit and trying something new. I'm actually going to start doing things a little bit differently. So, this is going to be my first attempt at doing this. I'm basically going to, instead of playing a game or something like that, I'm going to change things around and I'm going to do things differently. So for tonight, the special broadcast that we're going to be doing is not really about anything is going to be about something very specific. Recently, I have been doing a little thing with my TikTok. I have decided to start doing Star Wars Facts of the Day, where every day I post up a text picture and go into a fact about Star Wars. So tonight we are going to go over the week in review of my Star Wars Facts of the Day and each of the different facts that I've done. And I'm going to go through the reasons why I got into these and go over the facts themselves and the reason why I got into them. So let's get started with the very first one. So Star Wars Fact of the Day, my first one, Star Wars Fact of the Day. Did you know the Wampa that Luke cut off the arm of in the cave from Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back didn't die? There is a non-canon legend story about it. So part of the thing that I also included was the details about this. So this actually was a real story. And anybody who's into Star Wars and fandom and stuff like that, like me personally, I got into it back when I was still a little kid. My interest in Star Wars starts all the way back to 1977, the very first Star Wars when it came out. I was 2 years old when, well, okay, technically I wasn't two. I was basically one in a couple of months. So I was still in diapers when that movie came out. And my parents literally took me to the movie. And I was one of the kids that was crying in the movie or stuff like that because my parents couldn't get a babysitter. Because I was a newborn, I was the first one in the family. They couldn't get a babysitter, so they wanted to go see Star Wars, so they took me to see Star Wars. Now, according to my dad, I was not a crying baby and stuff like that. I was enamored by the lights and all that kind of stuff. And supposedly, they got me a little lightsaber afterwards, so I was into that kind of thing. So, just based on that, I got into Star Wars big time, and still to this day, I am hooked on it. So, doing Star Wars Fact of the Day, I'm literally connecting with my old fandoms and I'm basically expressing them in this way. So, in this particular fact about the Wampa, I mean, that when I first saw Empire Strikes Back, that scared the crap out of me. I mean, this is a monster that basically knocked down the Tauntaun and took Luke. And I was already a fan of Luke. I liked him. So when Empire Strikes Back came out, I was not expecting that to happen. We're in the first few minutes of the movie and Luke gets taken down by something. And I was like, wait, wasn't he trained by Obi-Wan? How is he able to be taken down like this? So now the information that I was able to look up, and the reason I know this is because I actually found out about it, is that according to Wikipedia, the Wampa that Luke was captured by, he escaped and cut off the arm of the Wampa. And of course, if you've seen both versions of it, it's slightly different for how it's done. In the original version, you literally just him swing his lightsaber at the Wampa and you just see the arm fall. You don't actually see the Wampa reeling back in pain from it. So it's really cool the way he does that. And in the remastered version, you actually have a much better look at the Wampa and see how absolutely huge these things are. I mean, when you do a comparison between a Wampa and like a Wookiee, I mean, they are actually a few feet taller than a Wookiee. I mean, Wampas are absolutely huge. And in the short non-canon story that you can look up, the Wampa is called One Arm because it literally has only one arm. And the whole interesting thing about it, and this is because I actually read the story and I thought it was super cool. The story is and I'm trying to remember the exact thing. I didn't actually look up the story. I'm going off of my memory of it. Is that, from my understanding, if I'm remembering it right, Luke is on a search right now for a new Jedi Academy. Because during the time of the Legends, which was the expanded universe at the time, he was trying to start up a new Jedi Order. So he was on a search for not only possible Jedi, but also a location to build his Jedi school or his academy. And one of the locations that he happened to be checking was Echo Base on Hoth. He just happened to stumble onto the place. Now, I might be getting this wrong, and it might be something else, but the whole point of the story was that One Arm was now leading an entire tribe of Wampas, and any person or vehicle or anything like that landed on Hoth was deemed a offensive thing. So they attacked absolutely everything. Didn't matter what it was. And there's supposed to be remains of other ships and stuff like that to basically ward off other people. So it's a really cool story. If you get a chance to actually look it up, the story is actually really, really cool. Okay, so that's fact number 1. Now we're going to move on to fact number 2. So this is the next one I did. Star Wars fact of the day. In The Empire Strikes Back, during the Battle of Hoth, Rogue 3, piloted by Wedge Antilles, Gunner Wes Janson is a crack military sniper, which is why he's able to hit the AT-AT or AT-AT with his tow cable and trip the walker. You can read about Wes Janson on Wikipedia.com, along with tons of other cool stories, facts, and theories about Star Wars. If you want to read more adventures of Wedge Antilles and Wes Janson, you can read the Star Wars Legends X-Wing series by authors Michael A. Stackpole and Aaron Allston, one of my all-time favorite series. Now, I really got into this particular fact about Star Wars because I really loved the character of Wedge Antilles, and it was because of him that I continued into Star Wars, because his character was one of the few that wasn't a main character of the Star Wars cast. Wedge Antilles was a tertiary character to begin with, because he has only a few lines in the first movie, and they're all at the end during the battle against the Death Star. The next time you see Wedge is in Empire Strikes Back, and he's part of Rogue Squadron in the Snowspeeders, and you only see him for the Battle of Hoth. He's not in anything else. Now, in Return of the Jedi, you get a little bit more of Wedge. He shows up for a brief, a few scenes at the beginning of the movie when the Rebel Alliance is having their meeting about the second Death Star. The next time you see him is when he checks in as Red Leader during the battle of the second Death Star in space. He's actually leading Red Squadron. So it's kind of cool with Wedge. He's basically gone from being just a pilot with X-Wing Squadron, Red Squadron, to being a part of Rogue Squadron, to then being a part of Red Squadron, but being the lead of Red Squadron. And so following his character, Wedge Antilles, has always been one of my favorite aspects about Star Wars. And he's been one of the characters that I followed ever since I got into the expanded universe of Star Wars. I mean, I went back and I watched him over and over again in the original trilogy. But getting to read about him, that was just a bonus itself. And he was actually featured in the Star Wars Thrawn series, which was one of my favorite series. And a lot of people got into Thrawn because of Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and Last Command. And it wasn't just because of the whole thing that he was a major character. He wasn't a major character in that series. He was a minor character, but it was still Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2. All of them were the main ones. But the fact that Wedge was brought in just maintained that he was an important character to be brought in. And when the Star Wars X-Wing series came out, it was a huge hit because there were so many fans like me who absolutely loved the whole aspect about X-Wings and the whole thing about not just the mainstream story, but the story about the Rebel Alliance. Because there were fans who got into that kind of thing, like me in particular. I wanted to know what was going on during the time period. I mean, we got a little bit of that in some of the other books, but the X-Wing series was the first time we really found out about what was going on outside of the primary story of Star Wars. And the X-Wing novels were the first chance we got to see that didn't feature anybody from the original trilogy. It was just about Wedge and the other members of Rogue Squadron. And that was the best thing about it, is that you really got to find out about the other characters that were involved. And I think the thing that got me interested about Wes Jansen, and a lot of people forget that he's the one that's writing Gunner for Wedge Antilles during Empire Strikes Back at the Battle of Hoth. And he's, as far as you, when you watch the movie, Rogue 3 is the only one that takes down an AT-AT using the harpoon and cables. Now, they go into it in the expanded universe a little bit, that there was another one that was taken down. Because if you actually look at the initial of the scene, there's 6 AT-ATs that come and attack Echo Base. One is taken down by the tow cables that's done by Rogue 3. Luke then takes out a second one with his lightsaber and throwing in a thermal detonator. Now, supposedly, there were at least 2 other AT-ATs that got taken down. Now, depending upon who you listen to about that, it's kind of up in the air of who actually shot them down. But I can't go into all the details about it, because one of the particular people that took down an AT-AT was Dash Rendar from Shadows of the Empire. Now, I'm going to get into that when we get to the facts of the day about that. But he's supposed to be one of the ones that takes down another AT-AT, because that's where Shadows of the Empire starts up, is right after the Battle of Hoth. Now, I'm not going to go into too many details about that, at least not yet. I'll get into that when I get to the fact. But there was also another group that actually took down another AT-AT at the battle. But there's a lot of hearsay about that, so no one's 100% sure. But there is a theory that there were at least 4 AT-ATs that got taken down. And it was, I'm trying to remember who it is. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who was talking to Darth Vader, was basically said they were about to go in. It was the general, I can't remember his name. That gum. I'm usually good about pulling those names out of my head, and I unfortunately am blagging on it right now. But anyway, the general that basically talks to Vader just before the Battle of Hoth, he's the one that's piloting the AT-AT, or commanding the entire force. And he's the one that, of course, destroys the shield generator. So the reason I bring that up is that he's one of the few AT-ATs that didn't get destroyed, AT-AT walkers that didn't get destroyed. But the whole thing is that in the whole, I'm getting all back to this, is that the reason why they focused on Wes Jansen in the X-Wing series is they brought him in because he is actually, and they started this out from the beginning of the series, that he was a sniper. He was a military sniper, trained in sniper and techniques and all that. So that's the reason why he was able to take down the AT-AT, because he knew exactly how to use weaponry and how to sight it up like a sniper. So that's the reason why he was able to successfully take down the AT-AT. And a lot of people think that it was just luck, but no. Wes was an actual trained assassin, skilled sniper. So that's the reason why he was able to do what he did. So, and that's one of my favorite facts about Empire Strikes Back and the Battle of Hoth, that not only that Wedge was a skilled enough pilot to actually not get shot down during the battle, but also that his gunner was skilled enough to take down an AT-AT because he was such a crack shot. So that's was the reason why I did fact number 2. That was my second fact. So let's move on to the next one. Hang on one second. Let me just get my notes up here. Okay, so fact 3. Star Wars fact of the day. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire is the only Star Wars novel that has a soundtrack, has a toy line, has a video game, and George Lucas was involved in a supervisory and development of the story. This puts it on par with the film. So, in addition to that, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was the only Star Wars novel that had a full production team. Lucasfilm and LucasArts was involved behind its creation. It was designed with a video game, And hang on one second. My notes are getting screwed up. Sorry. I'm having to adjust as I go here. Where am I at here? Okay. Full production team designed a video game, a figure and toy line, and was ready for release at the time of the book release. So the video game, the toy line, and the book all released at the same time. And this was a full-on effort by George Lucas and the writer Steve Perry, as well as LucasArts and Lucasfilm. They were fully involved and fully backed the entire Star Wars Shadows of the Empire subject. So it was a huge undertaking for Lucasfilm, LucasArts, and George Lucas himself, because he wanted to really push to see if Star Wars was still fan enough and still big enough that he could actually, market it as well as he did. Because here's the thing that you have to remember about Star Wars at the time. Lucasfilm pretty much was the sole owner of Star Wars. Yes, 20th Century Art supported it, and they were the ones who released it, but it was still completely owned by George Lucas and Lucasfilm and LucasArts. So everything he created with that was all from him. He may have gone to Mattel and Kenner and stuff like that for doing the distribution and stuff like that, but the designs and everything were his. So everything that he put out was a huge thing. So, due to it being set between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, it's the only book until the merger with Disney that was considered part of the original trilogy as canon by both fans and George Lucas. So, out of all the books that came out, even the Timothy Zahn series, and George Lucas himself has always said that technically was not canon. The only book that at the time that he considered canon was Shadows of the Empire, because Shadows of the Empire, the book, the soundtrack, which was done by John Williams, and the novel that was written by Steve Perry, he was involved in the development and process of the entire thing. So Shadows of the Empire is, even though Disney said the expanded universe is Legends now and it technically is not canon, Shadows of the Empire is technically the only book that actually was canon at the time. So, I'm not saying that Disney's going to do anything with it, but for any fan that read the Shadows of the Empire story, got into it, there has not been anything done in the current Star Wars canon that's controlled by Disney that has filled in that blank space between Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back. So the whole chase between Leia and all the other characters looking for Han, the transport between Cloud City and Jabba the Hutt's palace, that is still open for interpretation. So I understand that Disney has disavowed it and all that, but I, for one, have faith in Filoni that he will eventually do something with it. I'm not saying he's going to. I'm not saying what he's going to do, but I have faith that he's going to do something with it. Filoni was, for lack of a better word, he is the apprentice to George Lucas, and everything that Filoni has touched in Star Wars has been golden. So I am not saying that Filoni's going to do something, but I have faith that he will do something at some point. And we already know, if any of you who have watched Ahsoka, watched Star Wars Rebels, watched The Mandalorian, Filoni, when he puts his hand on Star Wars, it is awesome. So I'm not going to put anything on it, but I'm definitely have my faith in Filoni, because I have no reason to doubt that he wouldn't do something incredibly awesome with Star Wars. And if he decides to touch on Shadows of the Empire, man, I will be doing backflips until my back breaks. Okay, so moving on. The next fact of the day that I did is Star Wars fact of the day. Corellian YT-2400 spaceship was a new ship for the digital remastered of Star Wars A New Hope. It was then chosen to be Dash Rendar's ship in Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. You can see it flying in the remastered Mos Eisley scene. This is 100% true. I know people would argue with me about this, but it is absolutely 100% true. And it is one of my absolute favorite things about Shadows of the Empire. We got a brand new ship, we got a brand new character, and he was awesome. I mean, I don't know how many of you really got into Shadows of the Empire. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. Yes, it is Legends. It is not canon, but it is still an amazing story. The video game, if you can find it and you can play it, I highly recommend it because it is actually fun. The soundtrack alone is worth it. If you can play it while reading the book and playing the game, I highly recommend it. It's so much fun. My additional facts. Corellian YT-2400. First appearance in Star Wars Shadows of the Empire video game and the graphic novels as Dash Rendar's ship called the Outrider. That was the name of the ship, the Outrider. And there were graphic novels that were released. They weren't released at the same time as the Shadows of the Empire novel. They came a few months later, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Dark Horse that did them. You can find a trade paperback of Shadows of the Empire online. You could probably go on eBay and find it, but I wouldn't recommend it on Amazon. But I know there's other places around there that you can still find it. I actually have the book and the graphic novel myself. I pull them out every once in a while to read it because I just love reading that story. It's so good. The ship was also released as a Micro Machine, as the Shadows of the Empire playset, a Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game figure, and more. And there are multiple LEGO mod instructions available to convert the LEGO Millennium Falcon set 75375 into a YT-2400 ship. In canon, in addition to the Star Wars remastered A New Hope Mos Eisley scene, where you can see a variant of the YT-2400 flying, there is also a variant YT-2400 in Star Wars Rebels Season 3, Episode 6, called Iron Squadron. And I'm not gonna hide this fact. I was absolutely on the edge of my seat for that episode because I saw a preview of it and I saw the 2400. I was like, oh, Dash Rendar is going to be in the episode. And I completely fell down the rabbit hole. I went full on fandom over that episode. And then it turned out it wasn't even Dash Rendar and it wasn't the Outrider at all. But I was over the moon because I thought, oh my God, I can actually see Dash Rendar. He's getting at it. But unfortunately he wasn't. So it was a heartbreaking moment for me, but it was also awesome to get to see a variant of the YT-2400 in the movie or in the show because I had only ever seen it in the video game of Shadows of the Empire and the figures, which I have. Personally, I actually have the Micro Machines version of the Outrider. I never got the playset, but I did do one of the conversions of the Lego Millennium Falcon into the YT-2400. I do have it downstairs with my Lego collection. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It took a while to build that thing. And unfortunately, the instructions that I followed, turns out that there was a redone version. So I haven't had a chance to actually take I call it the Outrider. I haven't had a chance to tear it apart and rebuild it using the new instructions. Because honestly, I absolutely loved it. The worst part is that there were a lot of pieces that I couldn't find when I was building it, so it didn't work out as well as I was hoping. But still, it looks like the Outrider, and that I am absolutely over the moon for, that I have my own Lego Outrider, and I love that. Okay, next fact that I did. Star Wars fact of the day. The Jedi were not involved in the events of Andor and Rogue One. Though Jedi were involved in parts of the rebellion around the time of these events, it was the regular citizens and representatives that were involved. So, the additional facts on that. The rebel networks and organized operative cells that eventually created the rebellion and its military force were assisted by the few remaining Jedi like Ahsoka Tano, Cal Kestis, Kanan Jarrus, and Ezra Bridger. This is referencing, of course, the finale series where Ahsoka shows up specifically the Ahsoka novel, which technically was retconned, but goes into the story of how she first met up with Bail Organa. And, of course, we got the Tales of the Jedi, where Ahsoka meets up with Bail Organa also during Padme's funeral on Naboo. So, addition to the facts, in regards to the actual discovery of the Death Star and subsequent missions to obtain the plans, These were orchestrated and built around the regular citizens of the former Galactic Republic and the galactic senators who saw the evil of the Empire and did what they could to stand against the tyranny that had overtaken the galaxy. In the end, the Jedi did return to help with the rebellion and achieve victory over the Empire, but it was just regular people without access to the Force, but had hope, that won the day. And this is my one fact, and as many of you I know who are probably were watching the awards tonight, the SAG Awards, and or got nominated for an award tonight. And I know a lot of fans like me who grew up with the original trilogy, got introduced to the sequels, not the sequel, the prequels, and then we got Rogue One, which is one of the first standalone Star Wars movies that was ever done. And man, was that a great movie. I don't care what anybody says about it, but Rogue One, in my opinion, was one of the best Star Wars movies. And mainly because it filled that slight gap of the question, how did they get the plans? What was involved in getting it? How did they go through the process of getting the plans? And that, for me, was always a question in my mind. I had always wondered about what that was. Because it's the first thing you find out about in Star Wars: A New Hope during the letter scroll is that the Rebel Alliance had won their first victory, but we never actually saw what the battle was until we see this battle above Scarif. I mean, the battle just alone was amazing, and the whole story about what comes about in finding the plans and all that was just amazing. But the fact that they thought to do the entire story of Cassian and all of the aspects of how the rebellion was really getting started, that was absolutely amazing. Not only that, but also how the Imperial Senate, the Republic Senate was full. Imperial Republic, I'm kind of getting caught up in the words there. But basically how the Senate was being constricted by what was happening. And of course, we had the prequel series of Bad Batch where we actually got to see what was going on during that time. The end of the Clone Wars, we got to really see, bits and pieces about what was going on with the Senate and how it was falling apart and not able to handle what was happening. And I think that was one of the cool things about that, is that for most of those events, the Jedi were not involved in any way, shape, or form. It was either the clones or it was other members of the government. If there was a Jedi involved, it was usually in a tertiary capacity. Like they did something somewhere else, and that it had a ramification of the person that survived that was involved with the rebellion in a way and was able to make things come about. But when it comes down to it, that wasn't exactly what was going on. It was really just the normal people who were involved with the rebellion that actually made things happen. And I think for me, that was what really stood out about Andor and Rogue One. You really got that whole aspect of seeing what happens when the people see what's happening, how they're affected, and then they realize that they need to do something about it. And that has always been one of my favorite things about Andor and Rogue One, is you really felt what was happening. These people had to do something about it. Even though the tragedy of what happened to most of the characters in that show, you realize that they had no choice in the matter. They were put into the situation against their will, and they had to be involved. They had to do something. And I just love that aspect about it. It's one of my favorite things about it, but also just the battles and everything that took place during that process, right up until Star Wars: A New Hope. I mean, that alone was such a great aspect about that, was getting to see in Rogue One, you got to see who the rebels were, who was involved, the battle that took place, and the plans getting passed on to Leia, and then going on for A New Hope. I mean, there was so much greatness about Andor and leading into Rogue One, and the fact that a Jedi didn't have to be involved. A Jedi didn't have to be there for using the Force. I mean, obviously, the Emperor and Darth Vader were there, but that's on the dark side. I don't technically count them because obviously they're Jedi. They're not Jedi. Even though Anakin was a former Jedi, but technically he wasn't involved in the whole aspects of obtaining the plans. He was the one who was trying to stop them from stealing the plans, but he wasn't involved in the actual process of the rebellion other than to just create chaos for the rebellion in and of itself and the rest of the galaxy. Okay, so moving on to my next fact. Hang on one second here. I just got to adjust here for my notes. Okay. Star Wars fact of the day. During the story development of Star Wars Revenge of the Jedi, the second Death Star was going to be over the forest planet of the Wookiees. It was later decided to have it to be the moon of Endor, inhabited by the Ewoks. Additional facts. Ewoks started as Wookiees. Originally titled Revenge of the Jedi, the third film of the original trilogy was then changed to Star Wars Return of the Jedi. This was not the only change that happened during the story development. One of the most interesting changes was how the allies the Rebel Alliance would have for the final battle at the second Death Star was planned to be the Wookiees, Chewbacca species. Through multiple planning changes, George Lucas had decided to, quote-unquote, cut them in half and create a smaller version of Wookiees, which I just think is hysterical. The word Ewok was actually derived from the Miwok Native American tribe of Northern California. Now, that one I absolutely love. That whole aspect about about that George Lucas decided that for the Ewoks, he wanted to cut the Wookiees in half. When I first read that, I couldn't help but laugh about it. And there's so many people that make fun of the Wookiees and the fact that they're little teddy bears and stuff like that, and they wouldn't be able to, in reality, they wouldn't be able to handle going up against the Empire and the Stormtroopers and stuff like that, which I always find hysterical because just by history, that native indigenous peoples very, very seldom are the ones that are overtaken at first. I mean, to be fair, obviously the Ewoks did get terrorized by the Empire at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. I mean, they had to be. I mean, you knew that they took some damage when they first got there. And so, but you see during certain parts, you see that the Empire has already suffered at the hands of the Ewoks. And the fact that George Lucas wanted to make a species of animals and creatures that were not only intelligent and native to one planet, but that they were basically his original concept was to take the Wookiees and cut them in half. And I just love that aspect. Is basically the Ewoks are just as violent and strong and warrior based as the Wookiees. And there's that one scene in Return of the Jedi where Chewbacca is actually working with two of the Ewoks. Now, unfortunately, I don't remember the Ewoks' names except one of them I think was Paplo. I'm not 100% sure on the other one. Unfortunately, I can't remember. The only reason why I remember that is because I actually had the Paplo Ewok figure in my collection when I was a kid. Unfortunately, I lost him. I'm not going to I'll get into the details about my collection once we get to the end. But, yeah, so I thought it was so cool reading about, and I actually did the research on this. I actually knew about the whole thing about the Wookiees and the Ewoks from the history behind Star Wars, but I didn't know the intimate details. So when I wrote this fact up, I actually went and started doing a little research and found out that it was George Lucas who said he wanted to cut the Wookiees in half and make Ewoks. So I still think that's funny. But yeah, I really love that aspect that he was originally had the idea. And of course, we got to see the Wookiees in the third prequel movie, which was oh my God, the name of the movie just slipped out of my head. Revenge of the Sith. And oh, what is that? I'm sorry, my brain just did a fart on me. So anyway, we actually got to see Kashyyyk, which is where the Wookiees are, and it was interesting. Of course, we've got the whole thing that the planet looks very similar to Endor, but the only difference was, this is something interesting for me that I was a little taken aback on, is that, of course, Kashyyyk is a forest planet, but the amount of water that was on this thing that they were doing a whole beach attack, I thought that was really interesting. that's what they came up with. But I love the whole thing about that the Ewoks had their own flyers, they had their own blasters and stuff like that. I mean, they didn't get any of that from the Republic. That was something they developed on their own. I mean, the Wookiees hadn't developed, additional technology, though we never really got the full view of what Wookiees had the capacity for, because we find out that Wookiees can actually age, and we learned about this in the Han Solo movie, that Chewbacca is over 100 years old. So we know that Wookiees live for very long periods of time. So the fact that they had, developed the technology that they had, you got to wonder that they are a native people and they commune with their own planet. And there's that whole thing that was brought up in Bad Batch where they actually communicate with the trees. And the Wookiees are communed with nature. There's that whole aspect about that, which I personally love. And you get the same thing from the Ewoks. Now, you don't see it so much in Return of the Jedi, but you do get it from the 2 Ewok movies and the Ewok series, the animated series that was done on Saturday morning cartoons during the Star Wars Power Hour, because you had the first animated cartoon, which was usually Ewoks, and then you had the second animated one, which was Star Wars Droids, which featured C-3PO and R2-D2. Which I absolutely was hooked on that series as soon as it came out, because, like I said at the beginning, I was a diehard Star Wars fan. So, of course, when they came out with Star Wars Droids and Star Wars Ewoks and the Star Wars Power Hour, I absolutely tuned into that every single Saturday morning. I caught the entire thing. I loved all the episodes. I've gone back and I've rewatched Ewoks. I've rewatched Star Wars Droids. I love them. I honestly keep hoping that maybe we'll get another animated short thing with not only C-3PO and R2-D2, but honestly, I want something with all the droids. But I'm getting a little off tangent, but I'll stop back and talk about that later, because I have my next fact of the day that I want to get into. So, Star Wars fact of the day. One of the crucial motifs portrayed in Star Wars, besides the Force and government diplomacy, was the underworld. From bounty hunters to assassins, from gangster families to smugglers, from slave trade to money laundering. George Lucas's Star Wars has always had the underworld of crime as part of the lore. This is additional facts and information. Because of the endless levels of gray that sits between the light and dark, balance is maintained by the ebb and flow of that gray area of the Force. It's and this has been something that's been talked about a lot by a lot of fans. You can find all levels of corruption, criminals, degenerative personas, and profit from addiction and ill-gotten gains in Star Wars. From the gangsters like Jabba the Hutt and the members of the Hutt's family to the criminal organizations of the Pikes and Black Sun, spread across the Galactic Republic and the Empire for countless eons. The underworld of crime also aids and wars with the members of light and dark in order to profit in the chaos of war, corruption, everything in the Star Wars universe. Quote, "You don't survive at the Outer Rim by being stupid, Hondo Wanaka." I love that quote. And this is something that I was reading about, because this is something that came up for Shadows of the Empire. Is you can actually see this in almost every single one of the novels that was done during the expanded universe. Is for every plot point they had that was about the light and the dark side of the Force, there was also the political aspects that were brought up in the novels, but also there was always an underworld connection. You had this in every aspect of it. There was always the light and the dark of the Force. There was always the political intrigue, but there was also always an underworld theme. And if you look at every single Star Wars movie, you have to include each of those in order for there to be a proper balance, which is part of the reason why Star Wars is so good, because of the way George Lucas wrote them like that. He always included the underworld. Excuse me for a second. I had to drink some water. Because the underworld was a crucial aspect to pretty much everything that happened in Star Wars, because there was so much of the underworld that's involved in what happens in Star Wars. Because as George Lucas said, and this has been brought up by multiple fans and multiple actors who have worked on Star Wars, is it's always about balance. There's the light and the dark. And for each of those two things, of the light and dark of Star Wars, there is the in between, the gray. Because you can't have light and you can't have dark without the gray in between. It's the mixing of the two, of light and dark. You have to see gray. If you have a white light and it's going into darkness, it starts to go into a gray scale. This is just in theory of light. You have the dark, you have the light, but where the light starts to dim over, where there's the crossover, it turns white, turns to gray. There's always that gray area, which is exactly what the underworld is in Star Wars. It's the gray area. It's not the quite dark, but not quite light, because there's both good and bad sides to the underworld. You have things like the rebellion. The rebellion wasn't 100% light. It was also dark, because the rebellion had to actually assassinate people. There had to be crimes. There were terrorist acts. Innocent people got hurt during those battles. So the rebellion wasn't entirely the light side. Yes, they were fighting against the Empire, which was the dark, but there was a lot of gray on the other side too. There were people that actually benefited from the Empire. There were the people that survived and made profit, and their families were actually supported because of the police and the level of constriction that was in place. But they also suffered because of it as well. So you have the light and dark on both sides, and the underworld is where the real benefits happen there, because there is so much that happens in the gray area there with the underworld. Both light and dark is portrayed, because you have the slave trade, which is absolutely horrific and goes right up there with the Empire of being absolutely terrible. You have the bounty hunters, which are collecting in order to make a living, because people broke the law or they violated someone else. So these guys are basically coming and taking control of the situation for a price. And that's what's really interesting, is a lot of it has to do with the exchanges of monies, which is the reason why the underworld is such a great aspect about Star Wars. I mean, one of my favorite things that happened in The Last Jedi was that they finally brought in a splicer, which has been a subject point that I have absolutely been a fan of ever since the Star Wars books, because they actually had always used the word slicing, which is basically in Star Wars lore. That was actually how someone hacked into a system. It was called splicing. And you see this in basically, that's what droids basically do. They do a variation on basically slicing into the computer system and stealing the information. That was the coolest aspect about what so many things were done with the rebellion, was that they were breaking codes and stuff like that. That was basically slicing. We saw it with Echo and Tech in Bad Batch. They were basically slicing into the system. That's how they were able to get access to what they were getting access to. Droids do it all the time. In fact, that was the primary role of most of the droids, was to slice into the systems and take over things. That was how it all worked. And I absolutely love that aspect about it, because I always thought it was super cool. And I'm switching. I'm switching back, because that's actually, I've finished up all of the facts. So I started doing the facts because I wanted to do something that was Star Wars based, because, as I said, I am a huge fan of Star Wars, and I wanted to do something with my channel that was Star Wars based. So I wanted to do something that was really about Star Wars, so I did Facts of the Day. And I really had fun doing it. I think it was really interesting, and it gave me a chance to flex my brain in an aspect that I can finally share about my Star Wars knowledge. And I've got more that I'm going to plan to do. What my plan is to actually do Star Wars Facts of the Day. I'm going to continue doing it during the week,